good morning. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I'm Caroline and I work for Husqvarna Viking UK, and this is our first video of our two-day virtual event which we're really excited to be bringing you across today and tomorrow. There's going to be a mixture of live videos like this morning and some also pre-recorded videos that will be uploaded throughout the 2 days as well. Don't worry if you miss any or if you have to leave halfway through. These will all stay uploaded right here on our Husqvarna Viking Facebook page, so you can watch at your own leisure. So today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make sure you're always getting the best results from your sewing machine. Now, some of these tips will probably be things we all know and we all know we should be doing, but, and I am guilty of this, we do forget to do some of these things at times. And also, there's been so many people that have started sewing in the past 12 months or so. And these tips will be normally the tips you learn when you go to your classes, which obviously haven't been happening over the past year. So I'm going to share some of my knowledge, and if you've got any questions as we go along, please do type them in. If I can't answer them straight away, then I will come back to you once the live video has ended with the correct answer. So I'm using an Opal 690Q today. However, a lot of what we're talking about are generic tips that can be used across all makes and models of sewing machines. So I'm going to swap over so we can see the machine. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is general machine maintenance. So I'm going to get this camera a little bit closer so you can see what we're going to be looking at. So machine maintenance, there is a lot you can do yourself in between sewing projects. And there are two, let's just go over the type of bobbin cases. So we're going to go through how you clean out underneath your bobbin case. First of all, I'm using what we call a top-loading sewing machine. There is also what we call front-loading, which the bobbin case will be in the front here. There'll be a little door that comes down and your bobbin case goes in there. Now, if someone has upgraded their machine from a front-loading to a top-loading, a question I get asked a lot is, how do I oil my machine? Do I need to oil my machine? There's no mention of it in the instruction book. Generally speaking, top-loading sewing machines do not need you to oil the bobbin case area. There are the odd one or two exceptions from what I understand, but front-loading machines will generally have instructions in your book, and quite often it will come with a small vial of oil of where to sort of regulate oil spots on the case and in that mechanism. Top-loading machines, all they need is a good just defluff on a regular basis, and any sort of lubricating or oiling that needs doing will be done when you take it in for a service. So if it doesn't mention it in your instruction book, do not try and oil in that section there. So let's just get a little bit closer so you can see exactly what I'm looking at. Now, as I said, top-loading bobbin, and a lot of the Husqvarna Viking models have got a needle plate with no screws in whatsoever, which makes it a lot easier to pop off for cleaning. And also, and it all happens to everyone, if you get a jam underneath when your fabric goes all underneath, it's much easier to take your needle plate off. If you're thinking of buying a new machine, it is worth thinking about how easy it is to get into that section. Some needle plates, and we've got some in our range, so the Emerald range and the Jade series have got screws on their needle plate. And this can be a little bit fiddly, especially if you struggle with your fingers, dexterity or anything like that. So it's always worth having a think about how easy you will find it. And also I find if they have got screws on the needle plate, quite often there'll be a screwdriver like this that comes in your toolkit, and that can actually be a little bit awkward to get in underneath and then try and unscrew the screw. So I've got this in my stash, and it may come with your machine, it depends on the make and model. This little stumpy screwdriver here, just a generic sewing machine screwdriver, is really useful if you've got a needle plate with screws. It's much easier to use on a needle plate like that. So it's worth having one of those in your stash if you haven't already. But as I said, mine hasn't, so I don't have to worry about that. The other thing as well though, is if you have got screws, they are very easily lost. They're quite small when you do take them out. So have a little plastic tub next to you where you can take your screws and pop them in that tub. They're not going to roll away, get caught up in your rubbish on the floor, or roll into the bin or anything like that. So pop them into a little tub next to you. And the same goes for the bobbin cover. So more often than not, your bobbin cover is clear plastic. This isn't too bad, it's sort of a slight grey, but still, if that was to fall on the floor, it's quite easily lost, and we do get customers sort of reordering the bobbin case because it's been scooped up without them realising and thrown into the rubbish. So again, pop that into your little tub of bits so you know exactly where your bits are, and so they're not going to accidentally get lost. So this just pops off, so you can just use a screwdriver like this. I use this universal tool, but this actually comes with the top end machine, so this came with my Designer Epic too. But you can purchase this as a spare part, so if you fancy having this, ask your dealer about it. It's got a screwdriver on the one end and then this flat metal bit, but it's got a really nice grip handle, so I really like using this. It's great for undoing your needle and your ankle screws as well. But I'm going to use this flat metal end, pop it under the corner of my needle plate, and it just pops off like that. It's also quite good to regularly check your needle plate to make sure there's no sort of dinks or gouges in it. If you do ever have the needle hitting the needle plate, it is worth just double checking it because it can cause issues when you're sewing if there are sort of big dinks and chunks missing out of that. So regularly check your needle plate as well for any damage. And if you haven't taken out your bobbin casing before, so on the opals it's got an extra little bit there, and it's the actual bobbin casing that sits in here. Let's see if I can get a little bit closer. If I take that off, it's really important that you put it back in exactly the same position. So if you've never done it before, just take a photo with your phone before you take it out, so you've got something to refer back to make sure you put it back in. Some machines may have little markings that you need to line up, which obviously makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to take this out. Right, first of all, actually, I'm going to talk about cleaning brushes. So these sort of little brushes are generally what's supplied with sewing machines, and they are pretty good. You can get to where you need to. But again, everyone has their own sort of preference on cleaning brushes and cleaning tools. I do always have a couple of these handy, but I've also got some paint brushes as well, some old paint brushes, because they're quite nice brush. The bristles don't come out, so you're not going to end up losing bits of bristles in there as well. So anything like this is really good for cleaning out your machine. And I've also got this, which I think is an old hairdressing brush that probably came from when I was living back home with my mum and dad many years ago, because she was a hairdresser. And it's quite a nice wide flat brush, and I find that's quite good for getting in the feed dogs, but we'll go through that a little bit later. So have your brushes and your cleaning tools all in a little box. So I'm going to take out the bobbin case, and again just check in there if there's any little bits of fluff and debris, can be sort of all in there. There's quite sort of some little nooks and crannies that you want to make sure you get out. And then you just want to sweep your brush all the way around inside that bobbin casing and get out as much fluff as possible. And I'm going to show you, hopefully you can see that I've actually got, that's going to focus on the brush and not on the machine, quite a little bit of fluff in there. So you'll always be surprised at what you get out of your machine. So generally speaking, clean your bobbin area after every project is going to help you get the best result and keep on top of that fluff that builds up. Personally, when I finish a project, I want to just put my machine away and enjoy what I've made. So I actually do it before I start my next one. So when I next get my machine out, I do a regular clean out before that. And sometimes you may only get a small amount out, but it's always just worth keeping on top of that. Quilting projects are especially bad for creating fluff because obviously you're piercing through wadding, which is sort of quite sort of a fluffy fibrous fabric. And you'll find certain fabrics will create a lot more build up than others. So clean all in there. And again, check in between your feed dogs as well, because there can be quite a lot of build up in between there as well. So make sure that there's no fluff in there. And always do this, I don't think I mentioned, but I should have mentioned, always do this when your machine is turned off. That's one thing to make sure it's turned off when you're cleaning out anything from here. So on the Opal 690Q, I've got an automatic needle cutter. I'll get my words out in a minute. So sometimes if you find you're having trouble and it's not always cutting your threads, it might be that there's some thread ends sort of caught up in this blade. And so it's always worth just double checking that, because what you can do is, again, I'm going to try and get a little bit closer so you can see. This is the sort of the cutter mechanism here. You can actually move this all the way across and get out any little thread ends. Now typically I don't think I've got any in this machine to show you, but obviously it's cutting thread all the time. You're going to get little bits of thread caught around the cutter. So what you can do is just, so I'll do this without blocking the camera too much. Let's pop that there so I'm not doing it one-handed. Is you just push that cutter all the way over there to that side. So you can see I've pushed that over, and then if there are any threads in there, you can get your tweezers and just pull them all out. But make sure you always push it back, right back to where it came from before you start putting everything back together again. Because you may be doing this without taking your bobbin case out. So just make sure you always push that right back home before you put your needle plate back on again, because you will notice problems. So then once you're happy with it all being clean, you can just start to assemble it back together. Now, I know some people do use things like little mini hoovers to sort of get out all the fluff. Personally, I would never use anything like that. I'd worry that I might suck something up loose that I didn't know was there. You never know what's going on underneath there. So just a good clean out with a brush is more than enough to keep these machines in good condition. Until, of course, it's due a service. And that's when your mechanic will take all your front covers off and get to all the sort of underneath workings of your machine. So I'm just going to snap that back on and pop my machine cover back on. So that is it. That's how you clean out underneath the bobbin case. And again, do that on a regular basis after every project. Ideally, although I know it's quite easy to forget to do that. And you'll soon know, you know, I've been sewing a project before and suddenly the stitching just hasn't looked right. And I've sort of taken all the bobbin case off and it's been quite fluffy and dirty inside. So it does make a big difference having a clean area under there. So the next thing we're going to talk about are needles. So again, let me just... Needles, there are hundreds of different types of needles. And it can be quite confusing if you're new to sewing as to which one to use for when. I've just got a selection here. So we have actually got our own Husqvarna Viking needles. However, you can use Schmetz, any good quality needle. And generally, when you get a new machine, you will have universal needles in it, which are great for sort of medium weight fabrics, a couple of layers of cotton, things like that. And they come in different sizes. But it's also really important to change your needle on a regular basis as well. So again, I think the general rule is every 8 hours of sewing, you should change your needle. Now, obviously, that also depends on what you are sewing. So if you are sewing sort of jeans denim, then you would obviously need to change that needle a lot more often. And having the right needle, so it's a bit of a closer look there, so you can see this universal pack, I've got a size 70s, 80s and 90s in here as well. So yes, like I said, regularly change your needle. So you will soon hear making a little popping noise when you're sewing, which will generally mean that you sort of blunted the needle. Obviously you can't see it, you can't see that it's blunted, but your stitch quality will definitely change, and it will almost be telling you to change the needle. And like I said, have the right needle for the fabric as well is really, really important. So you've got quilting needles for if you are doing your quilting. They're sort of designed so that they can get through the wadding a little easier. And Microtex needles, now I love these for really fine fabrics. I used these when I made my daughter's christening gown because it was like a silky satin fabric, and every other needle just sort of skagged it and made too big holes. So Microtex needles are really good for those fine sort of slippery fabrics. And again, stretch needles for stretch fabrics. So there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of needles. So if you've done everything else, if you've cleaned out, if you've threaded up correctly and you're still having trouble, then it might be that it's the wrong needle for the job. And what I often get people to do is just have some like calico type fabric, a couple of layers of cotton maybe, and just sew some stitches on there, whether it be straight stitch or zigzag, and just see how that stitching looks. If it looks fine on that sort of fabric, and then you go back to, say, I don't know, your jersey, if you're sewing like a jersey fabric, and the stitches don't look right, you know it's something that needs tweaking. It might be the needle, it might be the stitch length. But needle does make a massive difference. And even if you have recently changed it, it could easily still get damaged depending on what you're sewing. Another quick tip is to do with winding your bobbin. So this bobbin has got a little bit of thread left. Now realistically, am I ever going to need that small amount of thread on my bobbin? No. So rather than wind over the top, just pull it off. It's just so much easier and better. Never ever have more than one colour thread on a bobbin because it does affect the tension on how it's wound as well. So yeah, if you've got a little bit of thread left and you think, oh, I might use that, I'm just going to wind over the top and then I can use that colour underneath at another point. Don't. Just take that thread off. It's going to give you a lot better result in the long run. So yeah, just pull that thread off. It only takes a couple of seconds to do, and then you've got another nice new bobbin ready to use. So spare bobbins are always available. If you're finding that you're running out and you don't want to take thread off, then just get spare bobbins. Never ever wind more than one colour on your bobbin. So let's just move that back a little bit so you can see the machine. Okay, so just boot the machine up. Now, when we go to threading, I'm going to talk about threading a little bit. It's very easy, and I do it all the time, to think, I thread this machine all day, every day. I'm just going to quickly thread up and start sewing. Sometimes it's always worth just going right back to basics if you're having a slight problem with your machine, whether the stitches aren't quite right, they don't look quite as good as what you're used to. Always go back to basics. So have you threaded correctly? There has been lots of times when I've gone back and thought, actually, no, I didn't thread that correctly. So there's a couple of tips that can help you get sort of good result when you're threading up. So when you're threading, always hold sort of near the cotton spool itself. I'm just going to pop that up because I haven't got a spool cap on. Hold it with your right hand, and that helps create tension as you're threading. So you're pulling against something as you're going around the path, and that just makes sure it gets into everywhere where it needs to go. If you're not holding this and it's really loose, then it's quite easy to miss a stage, or it won't quite get in where you need it to do. So hold it tight with your right hand, and with your left hand follow around the path. Now these are your tension discs in here, so you want to make sure it gets really in there, so you can give it a little floss back and forth if you want to. And also, always thread with your presser foot in the up position, because that means those tension discs will be open. If it's down, they'll be closed and your thread won't be able to get inside. So when you then do start sewing, there'll be no tension because the thread won't be inside the tension discs. The other thing is in here is what we call the take-up lever, and that always needs to be in the top position. Now on the Opal 690 it's really easy to do because I've got a needle up and down button. So basically the needle needs to be in its highest point when you're threading up. If you've got this function and you're unsure, because you still sometimes do go to your hand wheel to use it, just push that needle button twice so the needle goes down and then all the way back up, and then that take-up lever will always be in its highest position. So that's really important as well when you're threading up. So again, keep your right hand taut to get some thread taut, and follow the guides around. Okay. And then if you just pop your presser foot down and you pull on that thread, you should be able to feel the tension there. If it's just pulling through, you know that it's not quite in those tension discs, so you need to thread up again. So it's always worth just double checking and taking your time with threading up as well. I do it a lot, especially if I'm embroidering on my embroidery machine, because you're sort of changing a lot of colours. You want to get it done as quickly as possible, so you thread it really, really quickly and then realise that actually it's not been threaded up right, and then your results aren't good, and it actually sets you back and takes you twice as long because you have to redo things. So always take your time with threading up the top. And if you've got tension problems, excuse me, you should never really have to mess around with the bobbin tension. You should always just have to adjust the top tension, and that could be just because of the type of fabric you're using or the type of thread. Depending on what it is you're sewing with, you may need to adjust that top tension. Okay. And then again, making sure your bobbin is in correctly as well. Just following those guides round really, really carefully, and making sure they're all where they need to be. So I'm just going to wind a bobbin. Now, a lot of the Husqvarna Viking models, you can wind your bobbin from your needle, which is a really great feature if you sort of run out halfway through. It means you haven't got to unthread your machine just to wind the bobbin. So I'm just going to put a little bit of thread on there. And again, keep an eye on the bobbin as it's winding. Slow it down if you want to, so you can make sure that it's winding correctly. Because again, if it's not quite threaded right, so it doesn't wind correctly, I'm just going to put a little bit on there just so I've got a little bit on. And check it before you pop it in as well. If it looks loose, then just take it off and wind it again, because it will cause you no end of problems. So always check it as it starts, just to make sure it's winding correctly, it's going sort of up and down evenly, again as well. So then pop that in. Let's see if I can get that a bit closer for you. Bobbin case. So we've always got a couple of little guides down the front here. And now again, I actually tend to hold my finger just in the middle of that bobbin, just so it doesn't spin around and round as I'm trying to get the thread all the way around that. So, and you can hear it click in as well, so always listen out for that. Now, if it's got a little cutter here, then I just hold my thread, pop my bobbin case back on, and then pull that thread, and it's cut that and it's ready to start sewing. So again, really basic things, but quite often it's really important just to go back to the basics, especially if you're finding that your stitching isn't quite right. And you know, when we speak to sort of end users and things, we always go through the basic questions. Have you double checked the threading? Have you changed the needle? Have you cleaned out underneath your bobbin case? Because generally speaking, if you're doing those correctly, it will always give you the best results for your sewing machine. If you've done everything and you're still not getting very good results, then chances are it's due a service. So I'm just going to move this out of the way so it's not blocking my face. So talking about servicing of machines, generally speaking, it depends on how much you're using your sewing machine. If you're using it every day, every 12 months would be recommended for a service. As much as you're cleaning out underneath, like I said, there are lots of sort of sectional under here that you can't get to that will build up fluff and debris from your sewing. So if you're using it every day, every 12 months or so for a service, average use, a couple of times a week, 18 months to 2 years, and you'll soon know, sort of your machine will almost be telling you that it needs a little bit of a TLC from its mechanic. So that it'll strip all the covers off, get everything underneath, oil and lubricate that anything that needs doing, so you don't have to worry about doing any of that. So there are a few tips and some, as I said, basic things that we all know that we should be doing, but we don't necessarily always do them. And so it's just a little reminder to do those things on a regular basis. Clean out underneath, change your needle. The needle makes such a difference. There's been so many times when I've been sewing and suddenly realised that needle's been in there for quite some time. I need to change it, and the difference in the stitch is quite amazing, really. So always make sure you've got the right needle in and a nice new needle as well. If you want to, new needle every project, because chances are you're using a different type of fabric anyway. So, and you don't know quite how much damage has been done to that needle. So always make sure you put new fresh needles in, clean your bobbins, and check your threading as well. Don't rush the threading. I'm very guilty of doing that, thinking, I know how to thread, I'll thread this machine in 2 seconds. Chances are I have to rethread it again anyway, so take your time with the threading. And as I said, if you've got any questions, please do comment below. Even after this video is ended, it will stay uploaded on the Facebook page. And you'll probably be seeing me popping up a little bit later on today as well to talk about some other great tips and hints. So please do stay with us over the next couple of days, and I hope you enjoy everything that we bring you.